Hello, and welcome to Hopeful Conversations, brought to you by Robbie's Hope Foundation. I am your host, Kari Eckert. Joining me today is David George Brook, also known as That Gratitude Guy. David is a speaker, coach, and best-selling author, and a YouTube influencer with a deep passion for gratitude. Featured in Forbes, thousands have seen his message, and David is now considered a leading authority on how living a life of gratitude can improve an individual's life. David, welcome to Hopeful Conversations.
Corey, thank you so much. I always love to listen to those introductions, like who wrote that? Where did that come from? But it's just like, are they talking about me? Yes, but
We
I'm
are
very happy,
talking about you.
very happy to be here.
David, how do you personally define gratitude?
Well, I think as we were saying offline, I have a lot of little sayings and different things, but one of the things that is probably one of my favorites is gratitude turns what you have into enough. And so often, and I'll mention this in talks that I do in workshops and so forth, about trying to have little sayings, little things that can remind people of to appreciate what they have. And one of the things I talk about, not only is gratitude turn what you have into enough, which I think is central to that, but it helps you focus on your blessings and abundance. And it's so easy, I think, as human beings to go down the trail of, or the path of poor me. Everything sucks. I live in Seattle, and what's the first thing people say when you live in Seattle? Does it rain all the time? And it's funny, and yet on a beautiful day, which is probably the equivalent of 3 or 4 months out of the year, we would have that. You can't find a more beautiful place with blue skies and green trees and vegetation and so forth. So it all depends on how you look at something. And so I just choose, and I think the oldest thing that goes back, which I've never really gotten a better one, is the glass half full versus half empty. I've met so many half empty people in my life, and I just, including my own father, was one of the biggest examples who unfortunately took his own life. And it's interesting because it's a choice. And one of the things, you go to my website, thatgratitudeguy.com, and the first thing that it says when it scrolls underneath my name is, you and only you choose your attitude. So you can choose whatever you want. You can get out of the bed on the left side or the right side. It doesn't matter. It's up to you, but it is your choice. And so I define it as just focusing on all the blessings and abundance, as I said, and all the good things. And, life is very fleeting. It goes by very fast. And especially some of the ages that we're all getting to, it's like, how can this be? I mean, I've only got 10 or 20 years left, give or take, on this planet, depending on my health. And so it just helps you to really focus on that and gives you a much higher quality of life. And then I won't get into it, but there's a whole bunch of science behind lower blood pressure, better sleep, better attitude, better mental health, because you're focusing on all your blessings and abundance. So it's something, needless to say, I'm very passionate about. And it's just, again, focusing on, in its simplest sense, the glass half full.
I like that. So you do coaching,
Mm-hmm.
and do you think you can teach someone, I'm sorry about your father, but
Thank
someone who was negative or is negative, can you teach them to have an attitude of gratitude?
I think you can, but it does. That's a good question, but I think it does start with the person's attitude just in general, their overall approach to life and so forth. And for instance, I mentioned my father, which is very unfortunate, but here was somebody that I was sitting with him one day at coffee, and he said, he's just complaining. He was an attorney, very successful attorney. And, these people don't pay their bills. He used the word deadbeat long before I knew what that meant. And they're just a bunch of deadbeats. And he was going on and on. And so I finally stopped him. I said, Dad, all you do is complain. And he just stops for a second, and he looks at me and he goes, did it ever occur to you I might just like to complain? And I thought about it for a second, and I said, well, would it ever occur to you then I may not want to hang around you? So I think it starts with the attitude that somebody has. Are you willing to learn? We've all seen people that have this wonderful natural athletic ability, but they waste it by not working out, by not training, by doing drugs. You see these horrible stories of these phenomenal athletes that never make it because they turn to drugs and ruin the talent they had. So I think, getting back to the gratitude, I think if you have an ability to want to learn, I think there's lifelong learners, and then there's know-it-alls. Those seem to be kind of the two ends of the spectrum. And none of us like know-it-alls. We've all been around those people that always know more than you and me. So I think if somebody is willing to learn, Because what I do in the coaching part, if I find somebody that's really anxious to learn and they're asking good questions, then I can give them sort of the templates and the workshops and the exercises and the activities that'll remind them about how they're so grateful. And the perfect example too is that I use this is that gratitude guy's daily gratitude journal. And of course, do I write in it every single day? Yes. Well, this is a perfect example when you're teaching somebody about gratitude of how it works, because there's a little saying in the beginning of it that says, if you think about it, it's like a dream. If you talk about it, it inspires you. But if you write about it, it empowers you. And there's something I am so grateful to Kari Eckert for inviting me onto Robbie's Hope podcast that plants it in the brain and it's better. So I think it starts with a person that has a willingness to learn, who's not a know-it-all, who wants to get better and wants to improve. And then you say, well, here's some of the things that we can use. And one of the reasons that I know it's effective is because after talks, when I'm selling journals and books and I'm signing them and all that at the book table, people always come up to me. And my first question, and they say, well, that was a great talk. I really, whatever, it's very sweet, very flattering. And I said, thank you. And I said, what was your biggest takeaway? And 9 times out of 10, it's one of the exercises that I had them do so they can keep that little card on their refrigerator or their mirror or their bulletin board. Or it's one of the stories that I told to reinforce that I'm not just sitting here talking. I know what I'm talking. I've been there. You know, I lost a father, I lost a wife, I had different things that happened to me and would have taken me down a terrible path if I let it. But these exercises and activities keep you focusing on it every day. And it's not to say that every day is good. I told somebody the other day, I write in this every morning as part of my power hour, and it takes about 5 or 6
Yes.
minutes. And
You
it's so,
mentioned your power hour. I want to learn more about it.
yeah. But then there's some days, Kari, that I would have just not often, but not the best day. So what do I do about 3 or 4 in the afternoon? I go back and reread it again, what I wrote at 7:30, and just sort of get it back in my brain because I started going down a negative path. So yes, long answer to a short question. You can teach somebody, but they have to be willing. And there have been certain, I would say 3 out of 4 people I coach have a good attitude, but every so often there's that one that's just not willing to do it. And I can't do much for them because you can't want something more for somebody than they would want it for themselves. And so, and that person, I just kind of wish them the best. And it was great to get to know you and so forth. But if somebody says, well, and then you can tell when they do the homework, when they do the exercises, when they follow through, then you can tell somebody's really willing to do it. So I think, again, long answer, it can be done, but they have to have a sort of a good attitude about it in the beginning.
Something I really appreciated about your the Gratitude Guy's daily gratitude journal. I have been using it, and I've
Yay.
used yay, and I've used other ones in the past. But something that I think is different about yours is that daily number.
Right.
I that frame of mind. Maybe can you the before and the after? Can
You
you
bet.
explain your process there?
Yes, I will be happy to. And I think what I do in talks, when sometimes people have the gratitude journals in the talks, other times they buy them afterwards or whatever. But so what I do an exercise, which is I'll just explain the exercise, which kind of illustrates the daily number. So what I have them do is I say, okay, now on a piece of paper, here's what I want you to do. I want you to write down your daily number. What is your daily number? Your daily number is your kind of assigning a value, a mental health value to your moment at that very moment. How are you feeling? 10 is one of the best days of your life, and 1 is one of the worst days of your life. So think about that. And I let them think about it for a second. I said, you can do halves. Maybe you're 7.5 or 8. You're feeling pretty good. You know, maybe you're a 3 or 4. You're depressed and you're having a lot of anxiety and having a tough day. And that's okay. You're not going to tell anybody. It's just, so I'd say on the piece of paper, establish that daily number and write it down. So then they all write the daily number down. I said, now put a circle around it. Now, what I want you to do next is put down 1, 2, 3. You're going to do three things right underneath that daily number. Number 1, if you could only pick one thing to be grateful for in this life, one and only one thing, what would that be? Put that down at number 1. And of course, I know what it is for me, but I don't want to lead the witness. So I want them to write it down. Then they say, now the next thing I want you to do is the second thing. What's the second thing you'd be most grateful for? So they write that down. And then I come to the third thing and I go, no, it's not the third thing you're most grateful for. What I want you to think about, what was the highlight of your day yesterday? Because most of the time, most people write in the morning. I write in the morning. Some people write at night, but let's just say it's the morning. So what was the best thing that happened to you yesterday? And for me, I just had day before yesterday, my older son just had a baby. So I had my third grandchild. So and I was the first to see Emma Rose, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. And so they
Ah,
came by, Kyle and Susanna came by from the hospital on their way home. So that was,
congratulations.
thank you. So that was clearly the highlight of my day. So that was one, and I can put several things in there too, and so forth. Anyway, so then I say, okay, now you've written them down. Took you 20 or 30 seconds. And I want you to reread them again. Number one, gratitude. Number two, gratitude, highlight of the day, and really plan them in your brain. Really think hard about that. I mean, like I mentioned, how much I appreciate electricity now as an example after losing power for 5.5 days. Anyway, so then I go, now, after reading those three things, I want you to write down another daily number. Could be the same or could have changed. Whatever it is, write down another daily number. So they write it down. I go, now put a circle around it. So then I go, now by show of hands, how many people's number from the top
Oh my
number to the
God.
bottom number went up? And 3/4 of the time, 3/4 of the people raised their hand that the number went up. So, and I tell them, so there's a 60-second example of what that daily number exercise can do for you when the average time on this is 5 minutes. So imagine what 5 minutes can do for you. And there's also the highlight of your day. There's the daily number. There's a quote in there. And there's also the current event, special occasion. So you don't have to have a diary. Having a podcast on mine today, I was having a podcast with Kari Eckert, and so forth. And so you can have it all kind of in one place, and I'll write in the margins and things. And so, but the main thing is I try so hard. I've listened to so many speakers, and there are some wonderful speakers. And I thought, oh, they were the best. But then asked me the next day, and I can't remember anything they said. So here's all these exercises in a typical 60 to 90-minute talk. There's 10 or 12 exercises I do with things they can take home on a little 3x5 card in the front and the back, on their notepad, on their phone. They write down if they have a gratitude journal, in the gratitude journal, and then I have some other handouts, all of them designed to keep you being grateful when you're under attack with all the negative gamma rays of life. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just that daily number has been a really fun thing that people have really seen the value in that. And I remember I had one gal that not only talked about her daily number went up, she goes, but I just went to the doctor and my blood pressure went down 20 points just by being
Oh,
grateful. So that was cool.
you
That
said
was,
there's science behind it, which I
oh yeah,
absolutely
there's a lot of science
believe.
for sure.
When we first talked, you talked about the Empower Hour that you practice, and that
Mhm.
intrigued me because I feel like you just, talking about getting off what side of the bed you're going to get out of and
Right.
what you're going to pick for yourself for the day if you have an opportunity to, which I think you do. What do you do for your Empower Hour?
Well, I think that one of the keys to it to me is, and I say this at the end, but I'll say it up front in this case, is before you turn on any devices. No cell phone, no laptop, no tablet, anything, TV, whatever. This is all before you do that. So I call it the power hour. It takes about 45 minutes, but typically the first thing I do is get up, make my bed, because that's the dopamine hit. You've already accomplished something. Even though I live by myself in my condo, my condo is always I'm sort of OCD. So the bed is made. Then I go in and I have the first of 4 quarts of water because I drink a gallon of water. So drink the first quart of water. I turn on the latte machine. Then I go in and take my shower, shave, get ready to go. Then I go in and stretch. I notice as I've gotten older, I stretch for 10 or 15 minutes because otherwise it's harder to put my socks on. And so I notice that if I stretch, it's easy. And so I do that. Then I do about a 5 minute meditation back in my bedroom with a candle. Then I come back in here, write in this for 5 or 6 minutes, go make my latte, come in here. It's about 45 minutes later now, and then turn on the computer. And so it sets you up for the day. And especially this, even today, I know I was talking to you and I'm leaving town tomorrow to go to Arizona to see my younger son and his fiance and their family and things. And I didn't know what it was. There's just a couple of things that weren't right this morning in my head. And after the gratitude journal, I was just fine. So because it's so important to me, Kari. Again, we've listened to people that I've said, if you want to raise children or manage people, you better set a good example. How many parents have done this? I don't want to see you smoking, but they're smoking way themselves. And so I have to practice what I preach. And again, I noticed today was a good example, but sure enough, because I'm usually a 8 or a 9 when I start to write my journal. And after I'm done, I'm always a 9.5. And today I was about a 7.5. But sure enough, after writing my gratitude journal, I was back to a 9.5 again. And I put some stuff about the electricity being back, being on this podcast today, the health of my sons and my new granddaughter, and just all these things. And it's just so important because our brain sometimes defaults to negative, and they
Mm-hmm.
say it goes back to caveman days from, that you better hurry up and you're going to get eaten by the tiger or whatever. So it's sometimes it's a challenge to really focus on the positives, but when it does, obviously your overall mood just improves so much.
Yeah. I have that in my notes, the negative thought processes and how that feeds to potentially anxiety and depression,
Hmm.
which, do we do that without even thinking versus having to think about shifting to that attitude of gratitude in
Right.
those harder moments?
Hmm. Yeah. And I think it's kind of a default. Maybe it's, nature versus nurture. Maybe it's nature or something, but to protect ourselves. But it's just such a nicer attitude. And I won't get into all the science of it, but there's all this. And I read this about some of the science and the research and studies that have been done about an attitude of gratitude. And people live longer, and you get rid of toxic emotions like envy, resentment, hate, things like that aren't part of your life. And it just, people sleep better, they have better relationships. It's just all this by, again, focusing on what you have. So there's actually a lot of science behind it, and it isn't really a woo-woo thing. It makes a lot of sense. It's much healthier for you.
I like how you go with gratitude turns what you have into enough.
Yeah,
How did you come up with that?
that's a good one. And that's a great question because I don't know if I saw that somewhere or if I thought about it myself. Because the one that I said about, if you write about it, it feels like a dream. If you think about it, it inspires you. But if you write about it, it empowers you. That I made that quote up myself. But the gratitude turns what you haven't to enough. I think I may have seen that somewhere. So I'm not sure I can take authorship for that. But it was just so spot on. And when I go on to that particular module, when I'm talking about that in groups and things in talks, I mean, I just think to myself, gosh, it's like a cat chasing its tail. Everybody has to have a bigger house, better boat, better wife, better husband, better kids, this better trip. It's like even the whole social media. I post a lot of videos. I've done a couple thousand videos. And so I have a lot of videos on YouTube and Facebook and different things. And yet it cracks me up because somebody will point out that somebody took a trip, and then 6 months later, they go, we're back here again. And it's the same picture from 6 months earlier. And so they're just going like, here we are again. And they really aren't there again. They're just doing it to impress people, And so it's sort of funny because you're never going to get anywhere if you're constantly trying to keep up with the Joneses. And I spend the whole module. It's one of my favorite modules called Find Yourself, Find Your Talent, Find Your Passion, Find Your Purpose. And I start out with yourself. The most important relationship outside of maybe your faith, the most important relationship you ever have is one you have with yourself. And if you can reinforce that, and to use my 1 to 10 on the gratitude daily journal, if you can be a 9 or a 10 pretty much every day, your life just works better. Everything works better about it. You don't get insecure. You don't feel bad. You don't think about other negative things and so forth. And then I say, the next, figure out what your talent is, and make your strengths productive, make your weaknesses irrelevant. Don't
Yes, that's one of my favorites too.
Yeah, it's so important. Don't try to focus on things you can't do. Focus on what you're good at. Obviously, I love speaking, and I've been able to reach a lot of people. And even with this, I'd spoken to 10,000 soldiers at Joint Base Lewis McChord. And then I had a video that had 100,000 views. And then recently, I was featured in an article in the Costco Connection magazine. It was 32 million people got that magazine. And I
So
thought, oh my
cool.
God, now I'm reaching millions of people. This is so exciting. So it's really important to constantly have that reinforcement of the things that you're good at. And then I think after you have the relationship with yourself, and then you figure out what your talent is, and like doing a podcast, that takes a certain kind of talent that you're doing, Kari, as an example, and really focusing on that. And then you'll figure out probably what you're passionate about. And more than likely, those three things will then lead to what your purpose is. And people with a purpose live 7 to 10 years longer. And there's been studies proven over and over again. Like I'm in Seattle, the home of Boeing, and these people would quit Boeing after 30 or 40 years, and 3 months later they passed away. So, and
Mm-hmm.
their purpose was gone, and no friends and all that kind of thing. So really, really important to just kind of focus on those things and just reinforce that relationship with yourself every single day. And even like this morning, I didn't plan on this, but even writing in the journal today just had an impact on me that I really needed. Not a lot, just 1 or 2 points, 7 to 9, but whatever, but it made a big difference. So it can make a big difference in people's lives.
I would imagine that module is not something that a lot of people are. I mean, it's a hard one for people.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be hard for me to
Mm-hmm.
work through that, but the benefits of it would
Yeah,
be immense.
for sure. And I just think, and especially my age, I only started this but it was 10 years ago when I was 63 and now 74. And it's interesting because now most of my friends are retired and I just, they've lost their purpose. And people, when people talk about retirement, you listen to advertisements, for instance, on the radio, it's all 99% of it is about money. You're going to need $1 million for this and have this invest. You get Social Security, and then you get your investments, and then you have this return, you get an annuity, and that's all fine. But if all that was true, why do so many of these people are depressed and don't have anything to do? And of course, now thank God for what's the new thing? Pickleball. Thank God for pickleball. Now people are all excited. I'm happy to hear that. But I guess everywhere you go, it's click, 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 click. In the neighborhood, you can hear the click of the paddle ball or the pickleball bat or whatever it is. But it's just, but to have that, and that's why the way my life turned out. I was talking to my sister yesterday. It was her birthday. She lives in your neck of the woods in Salida, and she had her birthday yesterday. And so I said, "Oh, I'm on a podcast tomorrow in Colorado." And so we were talking about that and how fast it had gone by and everything. But she runs a bed and breakfast in Salida and just loves it. And I just think when you can find your purpose, it's so cool. And yet I don't think a lot of people do. And that we
Yeah.
have to have this job and we do the job, and 75% of people don't, hate their jobs and stuff. And so it's just fun when you can do something. And what's the old line? If you like what you do, you never work another day in your life. So
Yes.
really, really true. So I hope people can find that. I certainly, and I know you do as well, I certainly give people some of the opportunities to find that for what they're doing. And hopefully it's something they can embrace. But again, I don't want to come back to two subjects back, but my favorite cliche, it's kind of negative in some ways, but of all time, is you can lead a horse to water. And that's all you can do is just get the horse to the water. You cannot make that horse drink. And so I think that's where what you said. And for me, it's probably 2 out of 3, 3 out of 4, but I wish it was 4 out of 4. But there's a lot of people that are not going to be willing to do the help or receive the help or whatever. And it's another reason why I'm self-employed. I've been for 10 years, and I kind of wish I'd done it a long time ago. But I
Mm.
see why people are afraid of it. It's scary. And when you get that paycheck every other Friday and you get health care and vacation pay and benefits, all that kind of stuff, it's pretty easy, which is probably why, I don't know, 80% or 90% of the country probably works for somebody else. So it takes guts to get out there and do something on your own.
You were a manager for a really long time. I find your background really interesting
Oh,
between, I
thank
think,
you.
Nordstrom's and
Yeah.
Lowe's. And I
Nordstrom.
remember the first conversation we had, and you were talking about motivated people versus people who are not motivated. And that really
Yeah.
left an impression upon me.
Well, and that's interesting. Thank you, because it's kind of disappointing. And I know you get more thoughtful, you get wiser, you get more thoughtful, you think things through when you get older. And I don't shoot from the hip, but because it seems kind of mean, but I was just surprised for Nordstrom. 1 or 2 people out of 10 were pretty motivated, maybe 3. And at Lowe's, it was possibly 1, maybe less out of 10.
Wow.
And, I would say to people, don't you want to be the store manager like me someday? Oh gosh, no, I could never handle that. Oh my goodness. And they'd go off on this whole thing. And it just surprised me. And then this is one of those questions said to somebody the other day. I've now become quite comfortable in my later years with the answer to a lot of questions being, I don't know. Because why is it? I don't know. Well, what do you think? No, you didn't hear me. I don't know. And so how is it we decided that it seems to me, from managing tens of thousands of employees over these different stores that I worked in and so forth, who decided that people weren't motivated versus they were? And you'd find a few, but it was the minority that were really go-getters. And so I don't know, because life is so fast and it's so fleeting, and the life path that you and I have gone down even reminds us how fragile it is. And wouldn't you want to be just like, I mean, wouldn't you want to just like go for the, keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, as Casey Kasem used to say? But apparently for a lot of people, that's just not the case.
Do you think they're scared?
Oh, I'm sure that's a huge part of it. But I think, it's interesting. I think they could very well be scared. There was it wasn't Elaine Kubler-Ross, but it was somebody else who did the 5 Regrets of the Dying, and they were
Oh,
all people.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Yeah, Elizabeth, thank you. And she was the stages of grief, I think. And so
Well,
this
it
was,
was actually about dying, but it's been interpreted about the stages of grief, which they're
oh,
really
okay,
not quite the same thing, but it is
right,
kind of the standard now for the stages of grief: denial,
right.
anger. I should know these one,
And
two,
then
three, four,
the final
five,
one
but
is
I don't.
acceptance, I think.
Yes.
I think is bargaining, I think is one, and then
Yep.
I think acceptance is at the end. And so it's not quite the same, but it was similar where they asked all these people in their 90s what would they do differently and what were the biggest regrets they had. And there was a couple of them. I wish I'd kept more in touch with friends, and I wish I hadn't worked as hard. But the one that I liked the most was, I wish I'd lived a life true to myself and not what others had wanted for me. And you think
Mm.
about the parents that say, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be a whatever it is. And maybe they didn't want to be a doctor or a lawyer. And so I think the same thing with the self-employed is that, it's scary to your point, but at the same time, the reward is just tremendous because you control your own upward, you know, trajectory, I guess I should say. And I can work as hard as I want, whenever I want. And there were times and I even had a couple of bosses, unfortunately, both at Nordstrom and at Lowe's, that were borderline horrific. And I couldn't get over how somebody could talk to somebody and treat them that way. But that's what it was. And so, but I think probably the number one thing is they're scared, and it's just too risky because people want that assurance of that check every other Friday. I think that's probably
Yeah.
why.
Finances are tough.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
You started today's conversation after having a 5.5 day power outage in
Right,
Seattle. It was power is something we very much take for granted, I think.
right,
You don't appreciate the ups until you've seen the downs.
correct.
What,
Well,
explain that one.
this one was electricity, of course, and I think there's something about it that you have to have a scale of reference, I think, in order to really appreciate that. And I think that for some reason, the example that always comes to me is from different parts of town that I lived in Seattle, and meeting people over the years, particularly like rich people and rich kids of people that were rich. And you'd see something like, you literally, as silly as it sounds, that the young woman is going to the prom and she breaks a fingernail and she's not sure she can fix it in time at the manicure place. And so she has to go to her counselor and deal with her anxiety. I'm thinking, seriously? That's really, but that's the scale of reference. That's the negative part there. And what are you going to do when you get into the real life? And so but there's something about it. And when I look back, and one of the things, there's an exercise I do where I have people take a piece of red paper and I tell them, I'm going to give you 2 minutes. And it's red because when you write on this, other people can't see what you're writing. And so when they're all around at tables and things like this, and I said, that's the one reason. I'll tell you the second reason in a minute. So I said, now for the next 2 minutes, I want you to write down every screw up you've made in your life. Is the biggest mess ups, the biggest things you're embarrassed about. You're not going to tell anybody. I want you to write them all down on the red paper. So they're all writing down as fast as they can. So then I say, okay, 2 minutes is up. So here's what we're going to do. Red, number one, so people can't see what you're writing because I'm sure you're embarrassed. And red, number two, because I want you to stop. And so then I want you to fold it up and rip it up into as many pieces as you can. And whoever has the most pieces, I'm giving a gratitude journal to. And so they all have these piles of these microscopic pieces of paper. And I said, the important message is here is you got to move on past that stuff. You made a mistake. And I think also another thing, I've always been fond of the Steve Jobs commencement speech in 2005 at Stanford. I've watched it many, many times. It's 14 minutes long. It's on YouTube, of course. And he talks about connecting the dots backwards. And he said, you can look back in your life, and I could go back and I could use you and me, Kari, as an example. If it hadn't been for me following through on what this gentleman's name was, Daniel Jones, 2.5 years ago, then I would have never been in Costco, and you and I would have not been talking today. And so you can look back and see all the steps, all these little left and right turns. So it's kind of his point is that look back and appreciate how you got to that point. But then going forward, you have to trust that the dots will connect going forward as well. And then too, you can look back and see how that worked out. And it gives me the chills sometimes. I think about friendships and things that have happened to me that, gosh, if I hadn't literally taken that left turn instead of the right turn, we would not be sitting here talking. And it's really cool. And that's why I like the thing about trusting that it's going to happen in the future. But there's just something about I've been able to look back, thanks to Steve Jobs' analogy of connecting them backwards, look back at some of the ones that would have been on my red paper way at the top one or two things, just horrific mess ups in my 20s and 30s. But I found that took me to a place where through the retail, managing Nordstrom stores and Lowe's and all that sort of stuff, to where I am now, and I'm always kind of borderline emotional when I say this, but now 2 or 3 times a week, somebody tells me I changed their life. And I can't even imagine how I got here. I mean, how I could be so fortunate to get here. Yes, take the risk, work for myself. I mean, in the beginning, when I was going to be a speaker, holy oh cow, it's not a full-time job. It's not 8 to 5, Monday to Friday. So I'm delivering Postmates. I'm driving Uber. I'm doing DoorDash. I worked at the Seattle Seahawks headquarters or shop selling jerseys. And I'm sure, didn't that guy used to be a Nordstrom store manager? He's over there selling jerseys over at but you do what you have to do. And so it's really important to find that purpose. And for me, I found it, and I just wouldn't have been here today talking to you if it hadn't been through all those steps leading up to this, which is
like
why I'm
connecting the
so fortunate.
dots.
Yeah,
I've
exactly.
never heard that before.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. When someone tells you that you've changed their life, do you hear that? Does that resonate with you?
Yes, I think I really do, and it's interesting because it comes in a lot of different forms. There'll be emails, texts, getting cards and books in the mail, things like that. A lot of my comments on videos, on my Monday Morning Minute, different things like this. But I do try to really let it settle in and really relate. And the best thing is, I had a talk a couple weeks ago, and about 500 people, and they came to the book table. And I get this a lot too, which I really appreciate is, I wasn't going to come today, but I'm so glad I did, because I was having a terrible day. And because
Mhm.
of you, it totally changed my attitude. And then lots of times, then women will, can I have a hug? And then can we take our picture with you and get some gratitude journals and things like that? So I never take it for granted, because it's just, it's still, they're just sometimes, and I'll see my name up in lights or on a board. Here's our speaker. I just think, who is that guy anyway? How did I get so lucky to do that? But a big part of it, back to your point about being scared, is it does take guts. It's not for the faint of heart. And even I know the road that you went down, Kari, it's not for the faint of heart. I mean, it's, people crumble in a lot of cases that can't handle things. And so it's, there's a side of us that, I won't speak for you, of course, but to feel fortunate, if that's the right word, that we have strength that maybe we didn't know we had.
Hmm. Thank you. I probably asked you that question because I get comments like that. Like, I don't understand how you're so strong. You've made
Yeah.
such an impression on me. And I think sometimes I'm not able to internalize that.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that is. Because I'm grateful for the comments, and I do feel like I'm finding my purpose and my passion, and I'm so glad that I have the strengths to be able to do what I do, but I can't always accept that thank you.
That's a really good point, because I sort of understand why people are saying it, and I don't want to sound flip, but sometimes I feel like saying, here's what you didn't understand. You would probably do the same thing. You don't even know your strength until it's tested. And I remember, I know people, when Dana passed away, I know people were trying to be nice. And I don't know how you do it. And then, of course, the other thing, and again, at the risk of sounding something, if there's anything we can do, if I had a dime for every time I heard that, I'd have $1 million. And no, yeah, you can bring her back is what you can do for me. That would help. And so, and people are trying to be nice, but they don't know what to say. So they either don't say anything or they say things that don't make as much sense. So, but the thing that kind of came out to me is I try to explain to people back to what we just said a few minutes ago. You don't know your own strength until it's tested. And I thought it was sort of ironically sweet when people say, well, I know a lot of people that go through or went through what you've been gone through would be living under a bridge with a bottle of whiskey. And maybe that's true, but you're probably the same. I'm sure you're the same. I mean, those things are just never an option. I mean, it's just, we have this gift called life and we're supposed to learn from it. And this whole thing about if you want to help yourself, help other people is so true. And when somebody tells me that, you changed my life or you made a difference, I don't think there's a higher compliment that you can get. And so again, but I'm sure there are people that are under a bridge with a bottle of whiskey. I'm sure that happens, but I don't know. It comes back to that attitude of the glass half full and half empty, and even trying to see it half full through the worst of times is kind of a blessing in some ways.
So we have a lot of young listeners, and I'm wondering, David, what would you tell your 16-year-old self if you could?
Well, one, this isn't going to surprise you, but there's many, many things, of course, but probably one at or near the top of the list would be to get a gratitude journal, because there's something about that, as I'll say it again, if you think about it, it's like a dream. If you talk about it, it inspires you, but if you write about it, it empowers you. There's something so powerful about that in the brain. I'm so grateful to Kari for inviting me and so forth. And so I think that would have really helped, because I think that one of the reasons, and whether you are young or old, but especially even young and all the peer pressure and all the social media and all that kind of thing, is there's this constant barrage of temptation with drugs and all sorts of weird behaviors, and take this and do this and drink this and ingest that and so forth. And it's just, I just try to offer my strength to those people to focus on all your blessings and abundance and don't fall victim to those things. Because to me, so many of them, I never did drugs or smoked or drank or did anything, but I can imagine that they're a temporary solution. And, but then the next day you wake up and your problems are still there. And now you're back, you're hungover, or you whatever it happens after you take drugs or something. So I think that having a gratitude journal, and I think something else that just occurred to me, which I think is almost as important, I put it maybe at number 2, is be so aware of who you're hanging out with. And I had a buddy of mine made a comment once I loved. He said, I've had some great friends that have become acquaintances, people that are not good for you. And one of the things I do, and just did it last week, so I put gratitude journal number 1. Number 2, I call it the association evaluator, is once a year, once every 6 months, you should do a little evaluation of your friendships. And the first one is 0, 1, or 2 people you should disassociate with. That you just
disassociate.
Just shouldn't hang out with. It could be 0, but 1 or 2. And you don't have to go up and tell them, I'm gonna disassociate with you because the gratitude journal told me. The gratitude guy told me I should, but just don't hang out with them, and they're not good for you. Then number 2 is 0, 1, or 2 people you should limit your association with, and that's family or friends or siblings or people that you don't see eye to eye, but you're going to, maybe coworkers, you're going to be working around them, and so, but just limit your association. And then the third is my favorite: 0, 1, or 2 people that you want to enhance your association with and spend more time with them, because they always lift you up. And one of the things that, before I did the moniker of the trademark name, That Gratitude Guy, I was always called the Brooker, because my last name is Brook. And so the fraternity brothers called me the Brooker. And they'd always say, I need to go talk to the Brooker. I need to get a dose of the Brooker, because I was the positive guy. And, and that was very flattering. That's very nice. But nowadays, when they want to get a dose of the Brooker, I ask them, have they written in their gratitude journal yet? And they go, no. And so sometimes I just hang up on them. And I say, go write in your gratitude journal and call me back. My whole thing is I'll be your training wheels, but I'm not going to pedal your bike. You have to take responsibility. And so it's so important. So that it's like somebody said, the coach is really good, but the coach told the person to do the push-ups, but the person did the push-ups. So there's that responsibility that you have. So I think number one would be the gratitude journal at 16. Number two, really consider who you're hanging out with, because that can influence you so strongly. And then number three, just thinking extemporaneously here, I would have even gotten more education than I did. I got a bachelor's degree. I would have gotten a doctorate, because knowing what I know now, I just think education is one of the neatest things you can do for yourself, and educate yourself to master's or doctorate level or whatever. And because once you get into the working world, the education thing is not part of your life anymore. And so I think those would be three things I would have told my 16-year-old self.
They're good. Very good. Okay, we end every conversation with the same question. David, what does the world need to hear right now?
I think the world needs to hear that you are loved, and that you are loved first by yourself, the person in the mirror. Absolutely love that person and treat that person with care, and know that there's many people that love you in your world that you may not even know. Because thanks again to social media and some other things, we've gotten very much, it's all about me and not about other people. And I think it's easy to forget that there's people that really care for you. And it could be family, it could be friends, it could be spouses, girlfriends, boyfriends, people around you. But know that you really are loved. And I think if you remember that, because I'll come back again, I love to repeat myself when it's something I feel strongly about. If you can have a solid relationship with yourself on my 1 to 10 scale in the gratitude journal, at 9 or a 10, everything in your life works better. Because when you think about it, when you made some of the worst decisions in your life, you were probably a 3 or a 4, and you weren't really thinking clearly. So whatever you can do. So the world is important to know that the world loves you, love yourself, hang around with people that love you, and realize how many people care about you. And I think that'll really reinforce that.
Awesome. David, your website is thatgratitudeguy.com.
Correct. And you can get my videos there. You can get the gratitude journal there. There's a link right in the front that you press a button and it takes you right to Amazon to get the gratitude journal. And I feel very strongly. And these last they're $20, and they last about 3 or 4 months, I think, something like that. So I probably have 80 of them now, or some big number behind me on the bookshelf that it's about 3 or 4 a year that I use. And that's another thing about it too, that doesn't come up too much, but it's fun to go back and look what I wrote on a certain day. And I think, it's kind of a good or a bad day. I wonder what I wrote. And it's really neat. That's why the whole journaling thing, in some ways, like a lot of people, I wish I journaled my whole life. And this is, of course, a gratitude journal, but there's that space in there for special occasions and current events. So you can actually put the things you'd be putting in a diary. But it's neat to see what you wrote on a certain time in your life.
Yeah, I've done that a little bit. It is like even a high time or a low time, and be like,
Right.
Where was I at?
Exactly.
Well, I very much appreciate your time today. Gratitude Guy, David George Brook, thank you so much for joining me today on Hopeful Conversation.
You're
And
most
to our
welcome.
listeners, please remember to tune in to our next episode. And until then, remember, hold on, pain ends. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Kari.